said unto her, Behold, thou art with child, and shalt bear a son, and shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord hath heard thy affliction. And he will be a wild man, his hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him, and he shall dwell in the presence of his brethren. And she called the name of the Lord that spoke unto her, Thou God seest me. For she said, Have I also here looked after him that seeth me? Wherefore the well was called Beer Laharoi. Behold, it is between Kadesh and Bered. As the father of our faith, the life story of Abraham is critical in understanding God's character. In Genesis 15, verse 5, it states, Look now towards heaven, and tell the stars, if thou be able to number them. And he said unto him, So shall thy seed be. Most commonly known are songs like Father Abraham, which highlight the promise God makes to Abraham of a great nation and blessing upon him. Yet this promise did not seem to make sense, as Abram was 75 years old and Sarai was not in childbearing age. In the beginning of this passage, we learn of a problem. Sarai tells Abraham, The Lord has restrained her from being able to have a child. God has promised to Abraham a nation whose descendants will be so numerous and blessed he cannot count. However, after 10 years of dwelling in Canaan, Sarai decides to take things into her own hands. We have the luxury of knowing the ending of their story. The Bible is able to condense several years into a few verses. As we can imagine, over 10 years of waiting on a promise from God would lead any one of us to seek another solution. But God always fulfills his promises. Abraham and Sarah's narrative emphasize God's faithfulness. But today, I'd like us to focus on the story of a woman named Hagar. Something I've always loved about the story of Hagar is how in the midst of her pain and struggle, Hagar receives God's blessings and promises. She was a maidservant of Sarai in a way she can be looked down upon because she doesn't birth the promised son. There is no clear indication to how Hagar ended up in Canaan, but many assume she may have been given as a servant during their time in Egypt. The distance between Egypt and Canaan is believed to be over 200 miles apart. Hagar is a long way from home. As Sarai makes this decision, in disobedience and impatience, Hagar is on the other side of the situation with no choice in the matter. During this time and throughout the Old Testament, the ability to bear a child is viewed as a blessing. Naturally, it makes sense why Hagar would begin to despise her mistress. In rebuttal, Sarai deals with her bitterly, and pregnant Hagar flees from them into the wilderness. The Bible does not state how long Hagar stays in the wilderness, but the wilderness is a place of isolation where she is set apart to hear God's voice clearly. Hagar does not search for God, but instead God found her. In her search for safety and deliverance, God meets her and acknowledges her by her name. The angel of the Lord asked her, Where are you coming